right, Greta, this is number one. We're going to go best lesson ever. Today, you're going to talk about, what did you say? The lost art of analysis. Why don't you jump in, introduce yourself and then kind of jump us in. What does that mean? Lost art of analysis, if you don't mind.
Okay, so actually, I was an analyst
Mhm.
after I was a programmer and designer and everything. And then I eventually moved into becoming a project manager. And so part of what I learned back in those days when we actually had analysts on our projects, we were
Mhm.
called systems analysts, not business analysts, because we worked on projects. But we were really looking at trying to get the understanding of what's going on.
Mhm.
And what happened was we kind of went into this analysis paralysis. We tried to understand everything about how things are done today and then try to move them into, well, what if we had no technology or whatever? We could move them then into what we would call a logical current view, and then eventually, hopefully, move to the new. Well, what happened was we got so involved in trying to make sure we knew everything about everything that was going on, we never got any farther. And I actually worked on a project that was supposed to be 3 years. I was teaching information modeling, which is just the data portion of the analysis. I was called in about year two of a 3 year project to understand the information requirements. And I'm going, what's been going on?
For two
Well, we
years.
know where everything is. We know all the current stuff. And I said, but where are we trying to go?
Hmm.
Well, we haven't figured that out yet. And it's like, that's what happened. They got into this analysis. And so therefore, let's get rid of those analysts because they're just wasting time. So as a result, that whole skill of
Mhm.
being an analyst and putting together process models and data models and all of these things, which I mean, you can go to the nth degree to do them. You can put them into some sort of automated tool, and obviously, a lot of times, great.
Yeah,
How much time did you spend as opposed to going to a whiteboard and kind of sketching it out?
sure.
And so over the years, I think what happened was a lot of those skills of just trying to understand and dig down deeper kind of went away. And so only until a few years ago did this concept of a business analyst come back in. But a business analyst, business, are they supposed to be in the business and not on a project?
Hmm.
And in fact, I hear a lot of people say, oh no, we're going to do the business case. We're going to figure out what the organization wants, and we're going to give it to the project manager. And
Mhm.
at the end of the project, we'll come back and see if you did what we told you to do. We're back in that old mode again. And I think what I really see is when we get into projects and we start looking at requirements, somebody's got to look at it and say, what are we really talking about? What makes sense? How does this all fit together? And, I laughingly say, when we look at, say, a user story, it's not the middle line that's important. It's the first line. It's the persona.
Yeah.
Because if you look at different personas, you're going to see different ways, different rules, different processes. I always use the example of, selecting a seat on an airline. There's a process to go through, but depending on who I am, depends on whether I'm going to have to pay for it, whether I can sit in the exit row because I have family members under the age of 18, all of those rules that nobody ever looks at.
Mhm.
And so it's a combination of what kind of information do you need, what's the process, what's the dependency, all of those things
Hmm.
that have to come into just a simple requirement. And we talk about requirements, requirement management plan, keeping track on that requirement traceability matrix. Are we going to get them all done?
Hmm.
We say, here's this big old book of requirements, part of our scope, and we get to the end and say, I missed one,
Yeah.
because you don't ever track back to it. And
Right.
I think a lot of this just comes from being an analyst and continually asking why.
I
Why
like
are
that.
we doing this?
Mhm. Is this one of the, so like initial, I love it. Like when you were talking about it, like we started and then we like, is the pendulum swinging in a sense, like super over analysis, like that we don't get anything done to the point where it's swung over to, we don't want to go there anymore. We want to just move forward and not, like, where are we, do you think, like from abroad?
I think we've gone all the way over and we're on our back way, our way back.
Okay.
Because I think what happens is just like quality assurance kind of got cut out. And we realized that we weren't checking the quality on things. And I think now people are realizing that that behind the scenes that has to go on with the product owner or whomever on an agile project, especially trying to help understand and present that to the team and then continually answer those questions. You've got to have some additional analysis done in order to get that detail. So I think it's swinging back. I think the problem is it's not recognized as much on a project as I think it should be. Now, unfortunately, project management PMI has not done a really good job of promoting it. Yes, they have a practice guide, which is fantastic, and I recommend it to everybody. It's easy to read. It explains what has to be done. The standard, though, unfortunately, because it's in the same format as the PMBOK guide, it's hard to read and hard to follow. PMBOK guide is too. So I think part of what we have to look at is what makes sense? Where do we belong? And I think the more that we start to talk about that need to understand the stakeholders and what they're asking for, rather than being so concentrated on, well, here's our scope and here's our schedule and here's our budget. But is the scope all the way down in detail, which means it took you forever to put it together? Or do you do it in small chunks where then you get these requirements through the analyst doing that? So, I just think if you're an analyst, you're watching everything, you're questioning everything. Why is this being done? Is it still needed? Or is it, well, we've always done it that way? But the other part is working closer with the business people or whomever's on the receiving end. I know that's a big area. Project managers are, especially encouraged to spend more time. That's where the business analyst or the analyst lives, is with the customer, the key stakeholder, whomever. And I think a lot of that comes from just understanding what they're asking for and reading that nuance in their voice to say, I don't think you really understood what I said. And I'll give you an example, because I was doing a kind of a re-engineering of an organization, and I was just facilitating their discussion. So I was at the whiteboard and I was drawing a process map, but I doodle it all the time. Right. But every once in a while I'd pick up a different color pen and I'd kind of draw that connection between two things with like a red pen. And finally somebody said, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "Well, and I didn't want to say anything. And somebody else in the room said, "She doesn't think we know what we're talking about right there." Okay. And that's exactly what it was. It made them go back and say, "Do I really want to do this?" Because I could hear them say, "This is what we do." But, you get that tone of voice and you start to realize that you're just pulling out that there's some change that has to be made here. So, but that to me is what an analyst does.
It seems so much, I apologize. It seems so much richer than just, because I'll paint with a broad brush. Analyst doesn't feel like the sexiest position, right? Like it's like, but what you're saying seems like you're that analyst, and you're in Greta's like view is you're the translator between the business and all those things.
Absolutely. That is what I used to call myself, or when our daughters were small and they'd say, "So what do you and Dad do?" We said, "We translate." We translate between the computer people because we can speak their language and the business people because we learn to speak their language. That's the difference too, because an analyst listens to words. So another example, if I want to go figure out if I can jump on an earlier flight, when I used to fly all the time, but I would go up and I'd say, what's the load on the plane? Now, the load is a term they use. If I had said, how full is the plane? They would have said it's full. But if I say, what is the load? They give me numbers. It's this many seats booked out of so many, because that's their terminology. And by my learning that, by listening and watching, I now get a better idea of whether I'm going to be able to get on an earlier flight or not. And I think, once again, terminology is so critical, because I mean, look at all the terms we all use ourselves. I mean, the traceability matrix. I kiddingly say, don't ever use that term, but we're just tracking it.
Sure.
But those are the things that, to me, a business analyst or an analyst, or that mindset, brings into a project. And that's where project managers got to kind of see the nuances between not just what they hear and just the spoken word, but what are they really saying? And do they really know? But it's kind of fun.
It is fun. If you were to raise an ideal project manager, like through the ranks, like, would you have them say, you're going to serve as an analyst for X days, weeks, years, months, whatever? What would you think about that?
Absolutely. And that used to be the path we had to take. Because if you were going to manage any sort of project, especially a computer type of project, you had to have some idea of how to program, because you had to know what's possible and what's not. You had to know how to design, because once again, I had a project manager that, when I was designing back years ago, he was having me write a report where you would have put the data down one column and then come back and done the other column. Well, unfortunately, back then, we had to go across. The printer worked that way. Printer didn't go down and come back up. But he didn't know. He didn't have any clue. He was designing something with no knowledge of how it might have to work. So we used to have that, not a whole lot of programming experience, but some, a little bit of design. The analysis, yeah, that was a good year or so that you spent as an analyst understanding the business, understanding the people. And actually, Steve got brought into a project purely because he was the business person who knew the business. He also knew how to do analysis. He had a little bit of computer background. So they brought him in kind of as the business analyst from the business department. And then over time, because of his management skills, etc., he did get promoted into the project management role.
Wow.
But I tend to still like being back in that analyst role. To me, that's where it's fun.
What kind of skills do you think, like if someone were to look at themselves, because I guess a lot of people don't know, and they're like, well, I've got to be a project manager. If I'm going to be in this game, I've got to be it. But certain people might have the makeup that where they'd be a fantastic analyst and such an asset to the organization. Like, what kind of makeup would you see as those people are just, you're built for this?
They're inquisitive. I mean, when I used to teach it years ago, the first thing I would ask is, what kind of puzzles do you like to do?
Okay.
Because if you don't like to do puzzles, you're out of here. Because that's what an analyst is. Now, sometimes it's data, crosswords where you're playing with words. Sometimes it's numbers. To me, the jumble is more the project manager. But those type of puzzles, if you just want everything given to you, forget it. I mean, what you want to do is you want to understand. So, for instance, a good example, my son-in-law is in the process of kind of, because of COVID and had to change a number of things. He's now kind of working as a surveyor out in the field. And I'm fascinated by how that works. And I kiddingly said, I would just love to stand behind you for a day and watch what you do, because that's what an analyst wants to do, is understand, how does that work? How do you know when the lights are, the stoplight's going to change? All of that, those are things that an analyst would want to do. If you don't care about that, you don't care how things were built or done, forget it. Um, but it's that inquisitive mind.
I like it. That's you're selling me on it. It sounds good. And so like people out there who are like project managers now who say, well, goodness, like I don't either have an analyst or I'm definitely not using them or leveraging them correctly or setting the expectations of what I'd love them to be the advocate for. How in your mind should they leverage, use, incorporate the analyst position into the project in your mind?
Well, I think when we look at, if you go back to the practice guide
Mhm.
on the business analysis, it does talk about the things that a business analyst would do before the project as far as putting together the needs assessment. Okay, so if you don't get that and you don't have a business analyst, then the project manager has to say, why are we doing this project? That's the first thing. So rather than just jumping in and trying to put the scope and schedule and budget together, saying why, and then figuring out those people, those stakeholders that you have to work with, and understanding how much time it's going to take, because you're going to have these facilitated sessions or whatever. And then as the work is being done, you're going to constantly go back and ask them for clarification. And I think that's just where that digging down deeper and deeper is something that, that you end up doing. And I think if you just take some of these, especially when we get in agile, seems to be to me a lot easier. One, because we're not doing all of that analysis up front. We're doing it as we get closer to actually pulling it into an iteration. And usually the BA is sitting behind, working behind the scenes with a product owner to help clarify those stories and prioritize and everything. That's where a project manager could also be,
Mhm.
making sure they understand that. I mean, especially if you've got a self organizing team, that means the team is doing its work. Where they need help is they need to go have somebody come answer a question for them. That's not the project manager, that's the product owner or somebody. But if I, as a project manager, work very closely with that product owner, either I can answer those questions or I can facilitate, which I usually do at a whiteboard, get the product owner, get the developer together, and kind of sketch out what they're saying. And if they have questions, then you kind of sketch in those answers, whatever. But I think a lot of it is just getting to the point where if we can draw out a little bit more of what they are trying to ask for as far as the requirement, we're it's going to take us less time to meet that end.
That's really
Right
good.
now, we want to continually try something and look at it, but sometimes just drawing it on the board rather than wasting a lot of time doing coding or something makes more sense.
I like it. You're really like what I like about what you're saying is that you're really bringing like the star to this role to say like, wow, what a powerful position that it is and a valuable position to the company. It's kind of like that forward party that's like paving the road, understanding, making the job better for, the team and the project. I love it all. Now, there's probably some people out there that like want to step into this role. Like, how would you recommend like them prepare for this role or step into it? Maybe they're even before like they've started maybe they say, oh, this could be a stepping stone for me to get the project manager. Like what kind of background or practice should they get into to take on this kind of role, do you think?
Well, I mean, obviously, getting some understanding of the different analysis that we
Mhm.
would have to look at, because you have to understand, is there certain flows, certain
Mhm.
dependencies you have to do. Terminology is so critical. Is there a difference between different types of people that are going to select a seat on an airplane? What are
Mhm.
they called? What are the rules behind them? But I think the other thing is just spending more time watching what those end users are going to be doing, whether it's shadowing, and picking up where they're, maybe it's a struggle.
Mhm.
And that's the other part of a business analyst. It's not just the front end understanding the requirements, but it's putting it into place at the end. So when we talk about transitioning and closing a project, usually the business analyst goes with the product. So when it gets transitioned over to the customer, the BA goes with the product. And they then are working with the actual end user or customer, whatever, to make sure that all those pieces are filled in so they understand. And now, if we get more into DevOps, that definitely kind of pushes it all together, because you're providing, as a business analyst, you're providing back to the DevOps people the types of things that have to be done, to just, make those little tweaks to improve things that either we ran out of time and didn't do and didn't seem that important at the time. Maybe we have to put them back in now. Maybe we misunderstood, and so we need to make some adjustments. But the business analyst continues with the product itself. So they're more customer oriented, more requirements, and I say product, but it's whatever type of solution or result you're trying to give to the. They're focused on where did it come from, why was it needed, and how do I make sure that when I put it at the back end, it's going to work. I have a kind of a favorite saying also, because I say, the thing is, we look at the as is, which is the current. We identify the to be, which is the future. But the business analyst role is making sure we don't go back to the as was. And if we don't put it in properly, and those people on the receiving end don't see the benefit and don't, they're going to always find a workaround to go back to the old system and the way it was done. And then we've just basically wasted our time. Wow. So making sure that that as was doesn't happen.
I love it. I love it. So as we come to the end, and we do it, do you have any final words for, like, are you bullish on the idea of analysts being a little bit more back in vogue and other things, or how do you feel about that?
I mean, I think it's not just the role of the business analyst, but that knowledge that the project managers have to start to acquire. It's just like when we talk about project managers today who need to have a little bit more of an agile mindset.
Yes.
I think here's a case where they're going to have a little bit more of an analytical mindset. So rather than just being so focused on the schedule and the budget and, leading the team, but it's why we're doing the project. And if they don't understand that why and that vision, and making sure that we stay focused on it and understanding those little nuances, we're not going to make the result that we're trying to get. So I think it's one of those things that we just have to get where the analyst or the project managers, whomever, become a little bit more skilled in this elicitation, not collecting requirements, but really drawing out what is that requirement all about, and then actually making sure that we understand all the nuances of it, because, different ways to do different things.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's a good way to end it. I loved kind of like the challenge you a little bit had is about framing up in the right way and, bringing the analysts in and using it that way. So Greta, I think it was awesome. This was the first little episode. I got smarter. I think everybody else did too in this one. So I really, really appreciate it. And this will not be the last time we chat. I just wanted to say thank you for teaching us about the lost art of analysis. And I'm going to use business analysts a little bit differently in my projects too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.